This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here's your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for tuning in to the Ho 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 edition of NC Spin. This week we begin with claims from the State Superintendent of Public Instruction that we promoted 70,000 third graders illegally. We pick up the Silent Sam saga again with the latest uproar of the monument. And we look into who's filed to run in the March primaries and who hasn't. Plus we get the panel to tell us something we don't know. Speaking of which, this week's panel includes Peg O'Connell, or as her husband calls her, Mary Margaret O'Connell, political analyst, John Hood, syndicated columnist and author, Chris Fitzsimon, director of the Newsroom, and Rufus Edmisten, former Secretary of State and Attorney General. We'll begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages from our underwriters.
They're up before dawn and work late into the night. They believe in hard work, family, and doing the right thing. They stand up for their communities when others walk away. They're good people who just want a fair shake. They are farmers. At North Carolina Farm Bureau, we are proud to stand with our farmers.
Today's tools make you a real DIYer, and as a member of an electric cooperative, you have lots of valuable tools to help you do it yourself in controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad.
Production underwriting provided by the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Let's get started. You have to admit that the last 3 years haven't exactly been business as usual at our Department of Public Instruction or with our state superintendent. Last week, Superintendent Mark Johnson proclaimed that more than 70,000 third grade students had been improperly socially promoted since 2014 because they didn't meet the requirements of the Read to Achieve program. Now, he laid the blame to aggressive workarounds developed by the State Board of Education and former DPI staff. Peg, what do you make of Johnson's accusations? Is he just passing the buck here and blaming others?
Well, he's certainly pointing the finger at the Board of Education and previous DPI staff. I think to call what happened illegal or unlawful is a little bit over the top. And it makes it sound like the Board of Education is out robbing the PTA cookie jar or something like that. I think we have a problem in North Carolina. Our kids are not being taught to read, or they're not learning to read, which is an essential skill. So I think it would be much more productive if the superintendent and the Board of Education would sit down and come up with a solution that would help our kids learn the joy of reading.
Rufus, let's go back to the beginning of this thing. Read to Achieve initially was patterned after, I think it was a Florida program, in which former Governor Jeb Bush instituted, if you couldn't read at third grade level, you didn't get promoted to fourth grade. Well, that was the original intent here, but then after that started, the harshness of that, we were going to do summer schools, if you remember, for kids that didn't pass the reading test. There then became this real pushback along the lines of we were going to hurt the children's psyches and that we were going to have massive flunking in the third grade and it was going to create problems. Were we right to do these workarounds?
Probably so, because every time that you think about our educational system, something always reverts back to the farm days. Back when people stayed out of school to farm in the summer. And I remember people raising Cain about having to go to school in the summertime. We don't live in a farm economy anymore. And I was an old third grade teacher, and I stressed that the most important thing was to read out loud. Now, I don't know whether that's in the curriculum today or not, but I knew that those children would not succeed if they didn't learn to read by the third grade.
Chris, one of the things that happened here is that after the initial startup of this, the legislature passed a law which gave control of this program to the superintendent and took it away from the State Board of Education, if I remember correctly. he says, Mark Johnson says, he didn't realize how big a problem it was until he did a thorough investigation. What does this tell you about what was going on during that time?
Well, he's had a very tumultuous reign. I think that's an understatement at the Department of Public Instruction. It's also not a coincidence he's making this announcement as he's filing for lieutenant governor, trying to get a lot of publicity. Also, the term social promotion is very loaded. You know, there's a significant body of research, you can disagree with it, that it is far worse for a student to fail a grade than it is to promote a student and do extensive remediation in the following grade. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't do everything we can to make sure that third graders can read. That's absolutely true. But there's a lot of research that shows that that is a significant detriment to some kids' future. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. But I think a lot of this is actually the superintendent's fault, and a lot of it is a publicity stunt.
But John, I mean, let's get back to the basics here. If you can't read, you can't succeed in school. Bev Perdue said this on the show last week. Yes. If you can't read, you can't succeed in school. So where's the happy median here between making kids feel good about themselves and making sure that they can read?
Making them feel good about themselves.
Well,
no, it's not.
There is a robust argument about social promotion. Chris is right. There is a body of evidence. There's some criticism of it. One way to think about this is the legislature thought, I think, they had good intentions. They thought they could pass a law to essentially end social promotion. What we have discovered is that that is not possible by passing a law because there is a very strong resistance to the idea of ending social promotion among the people who run the schools. So we've been talking so far about Mark Johnson and DPI. DPI is not the actor in this story. They don't have anything to do with promoting students or not promoting students. This is a question of schools and school districts and how they have chosen to implement the bill, and they have not chosen to enforce effectively the end of social promotion. Maybe they should have, maybe they shouldn't have, but it's really them who making the decisions.
We also found out this was a much more difficult elephant to tame than we thought, right? Trying to make sure. We got kids coming from different backgrounds.
Of course you do. Of course. You know, and this story is a little personal. I was a terrible reader until I probably was in the 8th grade. And I think I might still be stuck in the 3rd grade in North Carolina if the social promotion stuff. I mean, I did well in everything, but I was never a good reader. Now I am. And so, you know, I do think what Chris is talking about, you have to balance. You could have a whiz at math. Yeah. And because he can't read as well, you're going to keep him in the 3rd grade?
And I dismissed that probably a little too quickly from that standpoint. But I think the question here, now we're getting into this argument, which also popped up toward the end of the week, about the 2 testing programs. And it appears that the 2 of them are getting ready to go to court to find out who should win the right to test our 3rd grade students. Should this issue be resolved in court, Chris?
It's a diagnostic. It's not quite a test.
Well,
We're talking about Amplify versus iStation. It's a diagnostic tool. The debate is, should you use the previous Amplify system, which is more vocal based, or you should have a computer-based?
One way or another, they're going to court.
Well,
should they?
This is one area where the superintendent ignored the committee that he appointed or was part of that made a recommendation that he then ignored, which I think is part of the problem.
I don't know whether they have standing to go to court, to tell you the truth. I don't know where the court even comes into this thing. What is a justiciable issue there?
We're going to be talking about this in 2020, I'm sure. The UNC Board of Governors hoped that by moving Silent Sam, they had removed themselves from the controversy surrounding that monument. They were wrong. Over the past week, there's been protests, both with the handling of the matter as well with the actual resolution they came up with. Rufus, as former Attorney General, let's start with the way the Board of Governors and the university handled this decision. Protesters are saying they're concerned that these decisions were made in violation of the open meetings laws. The deal had been struck before it was made public. Is this a legitimate concern?
I think it is a legitimate concern. Back when I was Attorney General, you made a lot of decisions. You met with your deputies, and you came to a conclusion, but then you had a public opinion. Now, this all goes back to the legislature, in my opinion, passing a foolish law. I call for it, and I said these monuments belong at Bentonville, where there is a Confederate memorial there. Let each county or municipality decide if they want to send it or keep it, but take them in Bentonville. Now we've got all this contorted stuff paying the Sons of Confederate $2.5 million to do what? I mean, where does the Confederates, Brothers of America, Sons of America, even have legal standing to be in part of this?
That's a very good legal point.
Yeah, but let's review sort of what happened here. As I said the other night, I don't often take up for the Board of Governors, but I think they had a hot potato on their hands here. There was an op-ed that the 5 Board of Governors wrote for the News and Observer and other papers. There was a lawsuit. The Sons of Confederate Volunteers,
Sons of Confederate veterans,
were threatening a lawsuit to move Silent Sam back onto the campus. Now, in negotiations, they got the Sons of Confederate veterans to agree to move it to another location, and they wanted funds to be able to pay for the reconstruction of it and the moving of it and the maintenance of it. Initially, they asked for $5 million. They finally negotiated that to $2.5 million and set up that money in a trust fund that was going to be administered by neutral, independent trustees. John, okay, this is not an easy issue.
No, it is not.
And we've been struggling with it for more than a year.
No, and I have concerns about how the deal went down, but the basic idea behind the resolution was clever and proper. Look, the state law requires that Silent Sam be put back where it was torn down. That is what the law requires. There is no wiggle room. The governor's all wet about this. People who've looked at it closely know that if, in fact, there was an attempt to enforce the state law, advisable or not, it would succeed, and the statue would be back in McCorkle Place, surrounded by protesters all the time. The only way out was to transfer the ownership of the statue from the state to somebody else. Then the law doesn't apply anymore. So that part of it I agree with. The difficulty is, arguably, the ownership could have reverted to the United Daughters of the Confederacy. They didn't want to mess with it. They then transferred their ownership to the Sons of Confederate Veterans. It's not clear exactly the provenance of the ownership rights and how it portrayed. I think a clearer, more transparent version of this deal was, in fact, the only solution.
So now we got lawsuits, Chris, that are getting ready to take place from groups of people who say, that the Sons of Confederate Veterans are a hate group and they don't want anything to do with this. They want this decision overturned. But we've also got people who are saying, like John said, hey, wait a minute, you can do anything you want to. It's got to go back to McCorkle Place on the campus.
I don't know what's going to happen, but I think the Board of Governors did nobody any favors by the way they did this, when they did this, how they handled it, why $2.5 million. Why have a committee that apparently did the board vote? We don't know if the full board voted it. There's still documents we don't know that happened. This is one of the most outrageous,
well, they had a telephone Board of Governors meeting and 20 out of
and the audio was bad. Now some are saying I didn't vote because you couldn't hear me. I mean, this is a joke.
The way this they negotiated a settlement before the lawsuit was filed.
Which is not even, there's legalities of
that is true, though. I will have to tell you, for people who are upset about that, and I understand, let's now talk about 20 years of Attorney General collusive lawsuits and how they're settled, that they use the courts in order to accomplish what they can't pass through policy. That's what this is an attempt to do. I'm welcoming people to finally be upset about collusive lawsuits and collusive settlements.
I think as John and Chris have both pointed out, I think there is no good answer to this question, and there's a whole pile of people who do not want any solution. They simply want an issue that they can continue to go on and on about. But the Board of Governors did this in the worst possible way because they didn't let people know what was going on.
Well, okay, so let's play what if here. If this was your decision to make, how would you have resolved it, Rufus?
I would have said that the Sons of the Confederate Veterans do not have any standing to receive any money. I would have made a petition to the legislature to go back and redo the law to say that these monuments ought to go down to Bentonville.
Rufus, that wasn't going to happen. That legislature was not going to change that law. They were perfectly happy with that law.
Well, now, wait a minute. Even if, that's certainly a path that they could have pursued. Perhaps the legislature would have changed the law. In the meantime, because the legislature is not prepared to act at that moment, it would have to go back on campus. And I want people to understand.
Well, that means if the lawsuit was settled. So the lawsuit doesn't get settled the day it's filed. There are briefs, there's a long time, there's a long delay. The legislature could have stepped in after the lawsuit was filed and done the right thing.
I would think that there would be a lot more immediacy than that. They have been in violation of a clear state law for months.
Yeah, this is not the other one. You've got Durham, you've got Pittsburgh. This will linger around forever.
Well, most every county's got.
In those cases, in the Pittsburgh case, they did transfer the ownership, which means the state law doesn't apply anymore. That is the right answer if you want to move these statues. Get them out from under state ownership. That's the answer.
So far as it goes, When are we going to put an end to this discussion?
Well, Tom, the worst thing about it is that $75,000 that they gave them to say
Not to protest.
to say they wouldn't come on cap. I'm going to form myself a group,
I'll
and
go
I'm
with
going
you, Rufus.
I'm going to
I'll
raise
go with
Cain,
you.
And you're
and
going
let's
to do it
split
a
the
dollar
money.
less than has to go to the Attorney General
That's
office
right.
for review.
Yeah.
So it's
No,
clearly
Rufus
to
and I will
avoid
do
that.
it for $73,000.
Yeah, and $99.
Wonder if we could get them not to talk about us for 70 years. The deadline for filing to run in the 2020 elections expired on Friday afternoon, actually, as we were taping this edition of NC Spin. We want our panel to talk about who's running and who's not. John, the who's not running has probably been more interesting in the news than the who is running. We're going to have at least three new congressmen in 2021, following the announcement that Mark Meadows won't run for re-election in the 11th, Mark Walker won't run in the 6th, and George Holding won't run in the 2nd. Was this the result of redistricting that the courts forced, or other reasons?
Two of the three is for redistricting reasons. Mark Walker lost an opportunity to win a seat in the triad. Of course, one might argue there's a lot of Democrats in the triad, and they hadn't had a member of Congress, so that redraw was understandable, but it left him without a home politically. And George Holding, same problem. Those were redistricting costs. Now, the Mark Meadows story is quite different, though. The 11th district in the western part of the state has become more competitive than it was before, but it's still clearly got a Republican lean to it. It's got all of Asheville in it for the first time in a long time, which does make it somewhat more politically competitive. But that was not because of redistricting, despite the national media misunderstanding it. It was pretty clearly Meadows said he had considered maybe not even running in 2018. But it decided to run one more time. I think he's probably going to go either into the Trump campaign or into a key role in the Trump administration.
Another acting cabinet
he is not
secretary.
losing national stature. He's probably gaining national stature.
Yeah, Chris, as far as it goes, this announcement pretty much caught everybody off guard so far as that's concerned. There's even a suggestion that Meadows might resign before the primary elections so that they will have to name someone to fill in that position. Have you heard that?
Yeah, I've heard every version of that. I do think it's a surprise because he waited so late, but he's been named as a possible chief of staff even off and on over the last couple of years. Mulvaney is now, according to some press accounts, not very popular inside the White House. That's one possible place he could go. So it's not shocking that he's going to do something else and work for President Trump in some capacity. It's a little shocking he did it the week before filing ended.
Now, Rufus, there were already a bunch of Democrats that had lined up to challenge this seat because it did now include Asheville, and it made it a little bit more friendly to Democrats. But obviously, nobody was prepared to run on the Republican side for Mark's seat. Linda Bennett says she had prepared a website just in the event that Mark didn't run. Maybe she knew something we don't know. But Senator Jim Davis,
like insider information.
Yeah, and Senator Jim Davis has filed also, in addition to the Republican candidates. Any notions of any front runners here?
Well, and also
I'm not so sure that John's right about this being a pretty likely Republican district. I think with Asheville in there that it's a very competitive district now.
Yeah.
It is more competitive than it used to be. It's still got a Republican lean.
Yeah, you
to
get
it.
into Haywood County and some of these counties.
Well, I mean, there are some historically Democratic counties like Madison. But anyway, Wayne King, who is a deputy to Mark Meadows,
right.
we are discussing it before we know the full filing, so we're not sure what the field looks like. But this was pretty clear. I think it was clearly an announcement after the deadline to withdraw. Right. So members of the legislature who've already filed for re-election could not withdraw that and then file the congressional seat. I think that was on purpose.
You do?
Oh, yes.
Well, I wondered about that, whether or not that was the case. Over in the 2nd District, Peg, George Holding had announced in plenty of time that he wasn't going to run again. There's several Republicans that have filed to run against that. Democrats, probably most notable is Deborah Ross,
Yes.
Who ran for the U.S. Senate, but we've also got several others in that. We asked this question the other day on the show. Is Deborah sort of the front runner in this campaign because of name recognition?
Well, I think she has name recognition. I mean, she did very well statewide. It wasn't quite enough to pull the United States Senate seat down. So I think that gives her a clear advantage. And Deborah Ross is one of the most energetic campaigners that I have ever known.
Well,
and
tell
she
you
is
what, she
not
worked
shy
like crazy
about
in that.
asking for money and asking for help. So I think it gives her a clear advantage.
Chris, over in the 6th District, which was a campaign again, a district that had been redistricted. We got several people who are running there, including Ed Haynes, Bruce Davis, Kathy Manning, and Derwin Montgomery on the Democratic side, along with Rhonda Fox, and Lee Haywood and Laura Picardo on the Republican side. Any front runners there?
Well, Kathy Manning has run before, spent a lot of money. Ed Haynes has been in the General Assembly. Ms. Fox works for Alma Adams and has a lot of ties to that district on the Democratic side. I think it's wide open.
Yeah, as far as it goes. But we also had some other people who announced that they weren't running. There was a big question mark floating around all week about, will Pat McCrory make the governor's race or won't he? A Civitas poll showed he was 12 points ahead of the lieutenant governor. So we've got an announcement from him on Thursday of this week. He's not running, but he's seriously considering running for the Senate seat for Richard Burr. Any surprise there?
Well, maybe he'd be like I am. You learn something by not running when you've lost governorship one time, and and so maybe he should stick to that.
Cherie Berry, Cherie Berry, the elevator lady, is not running again in this session, this coming year. Any particular front runners or any body?
I think on the Democratic side is Jessica Holmes.
Jessica Holmes, clearly,
on the Wake County Commission was chair, might still be chair of the Wake County Commission. A number of Republicans, Pearl Burrows Floyd, the former state representative on the Board of Governors, and Josh Dobson, state representative, and others. So it'll be a competitive race.
Yeah, I think it will.
I want to talk about the presidential ticket so far. It was very interesting. We've got one Republican on the presidential primary. We've got 15 Democrats, 16 Libertarians, and one Green Party candidate.
And Tom, I thought you were going to say, and a partridge in a pear tree.
Absolutely.
I mean, just first of all, Chris, talk about why didn't the Republicans? I mean, they had Bill Weld, the former governor of Massachusetts, and Joe Walsh, former congressman, who have declared to be candidates nationwide,
right.
And they wouldn't put him on the ticket.
And we talked about this like a couple weeks ago because it's Trump's party now, and they don't really tolerate this. I think this is unbelievable for either party to do that, to not allow people to file to run, whether you have an incumbent president or not. Obviously, all the action here is on the Democratic side. It's awfully early. I saw something recently that showed in 2004, John Kerry, I think, was 5th in the Iowa caucuses at the current date now, even though they're only 2 months away. So predicting that is very difficult.
What in the world is going on? We talk about all the candidates. What's going on with the lieutenant governor's race? I mean,
well, you got Pharaoh's army running. That's for sure.
You got 5 Democrats, and
It's now up to 6 and
I think
9.
everybody is saying, I see a way to the governor's office, and sometimes that doesn't work, or sometimes it doesn't work.
well, we can think of a lot of instances. You ask Dennis Wicker; he can tell you it doesn't
work. Our dear
work.
friend Dennis Wicker. And you know the most interesting race, I hope we get to it, is the insurance one. You got the 2 titans running against one another, Mike Causey and
Wayne Goodwin,
who beat Wayne Goodwin, and Wayne Goodwin wants to beat him back. I think that's the one to watch.
We got a couple of reruns so far as candidacies are concerned. We've got Mike LaPaglia and Elaine Marshall are going to square off again. Well, we'll be talking about this all through the primary season. We've got lots to talk about after the start of the year. Right now, I want to ask you to talk about something we don't know. Chris Fitzsimon, tell us something we don't know.
Well, NC Policy Watch had a fascinating profile. Stephanie Hofeller, whose father was the Republican sort of redistricting expert, long in depth. I encourage people to read it. The newsy part of that, though, is that she's going to put all of her father's files, whether you think it's a good idea or not, on a website for the world to see and sort. I think there'll be some more bombshells in there.
Interesting. Rufus, tell us something we don't know.
In 1803, the United States made the Louisiana Purchase from France, and that's a much better business job than the Silent Sam episode.
Greg O'Connell, tell us something we don't know.
So after all the sound and fury of efforts around finding a solution to close the coverage gap, Speaker of the House, Tim Moore from Cleveland County, said that when the House overrode the governor's veto of the budget, he would put that bill back on the calendar. It hasn't happened yet, but we are looking forward to that happening in January.
John, tell us something we don't know.
On a lighter note, Walmart has a survey of the most popular products by state. In Virginia, it is a heartburn medicine. In Tennessee, it's a first aid kit. In South Carolina, it's saltine crackers, presumably for being nauseated. In North Carolina, we're much better off. It's storage containers. So,
Wait a minute.
I'm just telling you.
Maybe we store our saltine crackers.
I don't know. Maybe we're prepping for some future Holocaust or
for
something.
names,
world,
John.
yeah.
But we're better off. We're sort of a veil of tranquility among mountains of disease. One might say.
We used to say mountains of conceit years ago, and I'm not going to make any comment whatsoever about crackers. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, give your feedback, and read my weekly column. Visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook, and join us next week when we'll give you the last word on the year 2019 and name our NC Spin Tar Heel of the Year and the decade. Until then, stay informed, and Merry Christmas to you and yours from all of us at NC Spin.
They're up before dawn and work late into the night. They believe in hard work, family, and doing the right thing. They stand up for their communities when others walk away. They're good people who just want a fair shake. They are farmers. At North Carolina Farm Bureau, we are proud to stand with our farmers.
Today's tools make you a real DIYer, and as a member of an electric cooperative, you have lots of valuable tools to help you do it yourself in controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad.
Production underwriting provided by the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.